The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped insects. Sacred Heart's emergency department thrummed with the controlled chaos of a Wednesday evening, monitors beeping their mechanical rhythm, the hiss of compressed air from ventilators, the squeak of stretcher wheels on polished tile. 3 patients in the trauma bays. 2 in waiting. 1 critical upstairs. Danielle Ross moved between them like water finding its path, her movements economical, precise, the kind of efficiency that came from muscle memory forged in places that didn't appear on any map. She was 43 years old and officially invisible. Her scrubs were hospital blue, faded from 972 washes. Her name tag read D. Ross, RN, the letters small enough that most people didn't bother reading them at all. She wore them that way intentionally. Her left hand tremored slightly when she reached for 4 supplies, not from fear but from something older, something written into her nervous system during 3 tours that the government had decided never happened. She'd learned to make the tremor work for her, making her seem fragile, harmless, the kind of nurse that residents ordered around without thinking twice. Her fingers found the patch inside her jacket lining as she moved through the supply closet. Faded green and black. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Dark Horse Company. Sewn into the jacket's interior seam with thread that had started unraveling 6 years ago and never been repaired. The patch was the only thing she owned that proved she'd been alive before Sacred Heart. Before Raleigh. Before becoming a name on a personnel file that stopped at 2011 with no explanation, no forward address, no pension trail leading anywhere the government wanted to follow. The patch was against her heart. Literally. She touched it 3 times a shift, minimum. Incoming, the charge nurse called out. MVA, multiple lacerations, possible thoracic involvement. ETA for minutes. Danielle didn't acknowledge the call with words. She simply turned and began moving. Trauma Bay 2 needed the 4 setup refreshed. The defibrillator pads were due for replacement. The suction tip was clogged. Her hands did the work while her eyes stayed down, her presence so unremarkable that the resident never even noticed her rearranging the entire setup around his theoretical protocols. That was when Dr. Edmund Caldwell appeared in her line of sight. He moved through the emergency department like a man who'd read every hospital procedural drama on television and believed they were documentaries about his own genius. 56, silver-haired, the kind of expensive cologne that lingered in doorways like a warning. His voice carried that particular cadence of someone used to being the smartest person in every room, calculated, certain, the type that made people nod even when they knew he was wrong. Danielle had noticed 3 inconsistencies in his medication logs in the past 72 hours. Fentanyl quantities that didn't match documented patient usage. Hydromorphone entries where the numbers seemed to blur at the edges. A missing morphine vial from the locked cabinet that had been signed out by someone named J. Stevens, who didn't exist in the nursing roster. The inconsistencies were small. Almost invisible. But she'd been trained to see small inconsistencies. Small inconsistencies kept you alive. She didn't let her expression change as Caldwell passed, but she angled slightly so he wouldn't have to move around her. Deference without words. The MVA arrived exactly 3 minutes ahead of the ETA. 2 patients, 1 critical, 1 walking wounded with a laceration across his upper arm that needed stitches, not emergency medicine. Danielle had the critical one in Trauma Bay 2 before the paramedics finished their handoff, 47-year-old male, blunt force trauma to the anterior abdomen, blood pressure dropping, conscious but disoriented. She'd moved his 4 to a larger bore even as the resident was still reading the paramedic report, because that's what you did when you'd seen 3 men bleed out from abdominal injuries, 2 of them because no one had the foresight to upgrade their access lines. She was taping the second 4 when Caldwell appeared beside her. Pressure, he asked. 84/56. Trending down. Her voice stayed soft, the voice of someone accustomed to deferring. He's been alert, now slipping into confusion. Caldwell nodded once, dismissing her with his eyes, turning his attention to the patient as if she'd just been a speaker reading from a script. She stepped back. Melted into the corner. Became the kind of invisible that only trained people could maintain, the kind that let her watch everything without appearing to watch anything at all. The critical patient stabilized. Surgery would take him to the 3rd floor within 20 minutes. The walking wounded got his stitches and a discharge instruction sheet he wouldn't read. By 8:30, the emergency department had cycled through its chaos and returned to its baseline hum, for patients waiting for rooms upstairs, 2 minor injuries, 1 drunk and disorderly who'd be discharged in an hour minus the disorderly part. That was when the Marine arrived. The paramedics called it in over the radio with the kind of precision that meant military. 42-year-old male, combat-related trauma, shrapnel wounds to the lower abdomen and right leg, conscious and alert, ETA 3 minutes. The dispatcher didn't use the word Marine, but Danielle heard it anyway. She heard it in the urgency, in the way the paramedics' voices changed, in the specificity of the injuries. Shrapnel wounds meant IED. IED in a paramedic call meant overseas rotation. She was already moving toward Trauma Bay 1 when the ambulance pulled up. The stretcher came through the doors first, wheels squeaking against the tile, the paramedics calling out vitals and injuries with the kind of verbal precision that meant textbook combat medicine. The patient was on his back, oxygen already running, left arm secured with a field dressing, blood seeping through gauze on his right leg. His eyes were open. Blue. Sharp as glass until the paramedic pushed morphine and they started to soften. That's when he saw her. Recognition flashed across his face like a current. Not surprise. Recognition. The kind of look that said he knew her, had known her, the kind of look that collapsed time into a single point where what had been was suddenly present again. He opened his mouth to say something, and Danielle felt the world tilt sideways on its axis because she knew him too. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hayes. Charlie Platoon. Fallujah, 2006. Sanjin Valley, 2008. Tikrit, 2009. Her son's commanding officer. Morphine's taking effect, the second paramedic said, and Hayes's eyes lost focus. The sharp blue became distant, cloudy, the kind of distance that meant the pain was finally releasing its grip. His head rolled slightly on the stretcher, and he was under, the brief window of recognition sealed behind the pharmaceutical curtain. Danielle didn't stop moving. Her hands took the report, her eyes read the vitals, her voice said the right things to the trauma resident who'd just arrived. Shrapnel fragment through the lower abdomen. Entry wound approximately 4 centimeters, exit approximately 3. Right leg laceration, no arterial involvement, primary source of blood loss. BP stable at current fluid rate. No respiratory compromise. She moved with him into the bay, hands already reaching for the trauma setup she'd prepared unconsciously, the muscle memory moving her even as her mind was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere overseas. Somewhere in a classroom with desert dust on the windows and a major with a faded unit patch teaching 19-year-old Marines how to apply tourniquets while rounds came in from across the river. That was when she felt the weight of attention. Dr. Caldwell stood in the bay's entrance, his eyes moving between Hayes and Danielle with the particular quality of someone connecting dots he shouldn't have been able to see. His gaze lingered on her hands, steady now, professional, the tremor completely absent, as she efficiently established the secondary fall line. He watched her move through the trauma protocol with a precision that didn't match her personnel file, watched her voice drop an octave when giving instructions to the resident, watched her hands move like someone trained under fire. The resident didn't notice. The other nurses didn't notice. But Caldwell noticed everything. He was still watching when the CT scanner got ordered, when the surgical team was paged, when Hayes was being prepped for transport upstairs. Caldwell's eyes tracked her every movement, and Danielle felt the familiar weight of exposure creeping across her shoulders like a second skin. She knew that look. She'd seen it before, the look of someone who'd just realized that the person standing in front of him was not what the file said she should be. The paramedics wheeled Hayes out toward the elevators. His eyes were closed, the morphine keeping him unconscious and safe from the pain of compound fractures and embedded shrapnel. Danielle watched the stretcher disappear around the corner, and when she turned back to the trauma bay to begin cleaning up, Caldwell was gone. but she could feel him somewhere in the building, in some office or stairwell, running her name through his head and trying to figure out how a trauma nurse with a 9-year employment record and a clean background check had just demonstrated the kind of tactical competence that didn't come from a community college nursing program and a handful of hospital certifications. The overhead page crackled at 7:44 a.m., during shift change chaos, during the moment when Sacred Heart's emergency department was a controlled explosion of beeping monitors and arrival alerts. Danielle was halfway through vitals on a chest pain admission when the voice cut through, "Nurse Danny to administration. Nurse Danny to administration." The diminutive nickname echoed across the floor. She froze for exactly 2 seconds. Around her, she felt the shift, a resident smirk, 2 techs exchanging glances, the attending's knowing pause. She'd spent 9 years keeping her head down. She'd spent 9 years being invisible. She set the blood pressure cuff on the bedside table with mechanical precision and walked toward the administrative corridor while 30 staff members watched. Dr. Edmund Caldwell waited in the administrator's office with his hands folded on the desk like he owned the building. HR sat beside him, a woman named Patricia who kept glancing at a folder she wouldn't open. "Danny," Caldwell began, his voice smooth as chlorhexidine, "we've noticed some concerning behaviors. Overstepping your scope. Questioning physician orders. Asking about medication counts that aren't your responsibility. Pulling charts you have no reason to review." He paused. He was watching her face. "Perhaps emergency medicine isn't your forte anymore." Danielle didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She took one measured breath, and in that breath, she felt the weight of 9 years of burying who she was, of swallowing insults, of accepting the diminishment. A single tear escaped her left eye. Not from fear. From rage. From the impossible discipline of keeping that rage behind her teeth. She wiped it without breaking eye contact. "I've survived worse than you, doctor." Her voice came out flat. Clinical. The voice of someone who had already died 100 times and returned. Patricia shifted in her chair. Caldwell's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected her to speak at all. 2 hours later, Danielle was restocking the supply closet when the door opened and Caldwell slipped inside, blocking her exit. The fluorescent lights hummed above them, a sound like distant electrical warning. "You're very observant, Danny. Too observant." His voice was calm, which was worse than anger. Calm was premeditation. "I've seen you looking at medication counts. Reviewing charts that aren't your patients. Asking about shift schedules that don't concern you. That's a HIPAA violation. That's a fireable offense." He stepped closer. "Unless you'd like to take a nice quiet transfer to pediatrics. MedSurg, somewhere your attention to detail doesn't become a problem." She reached past him for the door. Her hand didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. "No. No." He smiled. It was a smile like a wolf showing its teeth. "Then you need to understand what happens to people who see things they shouldn't." She didn't respond. She moved past him, not around him, past him, the way a surgeon moves through a crowded OR, with ownership and precision. He didn't stop her. He didn't need to. He had already made his move. That evening, at 5:36 p.m., the night shift arrived in clusters near the parking lot, loading their bags into cars, trading coffee for energy drinks. Caldwell walked out beside Danielle, and when they reached the point where the maximum number of staff could witness, he stopped. His voice carried across the asphalt. "Danielle, effective immediately, you're being reassigned to the general MedSurg floor. Your trauma certification is suspended pending a competency review. You'll need to turn in your emergency department badge and access card." 15 nurses turned to look. The silence that followed was the kind that comes from watching someone get erased in real time. Danielle stood still for exactly 3 seconds. She felt the weight of their stares like physical pressure. She felt Caldwell watching for her to break, to protest, to give him the satisfaction of her cracking. Instead, she reached up and unclipped the badge from her scrubs, the one that had given her access to the emergency department for 9 years, the one that held her secret like a vault. She set it in Caldwell's open palm. "Whatever you need, doctor." Her voice was flat as a blade. She turned and walked to her car as whispers spread like contagion behind her. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel his confusion radiating like heat. He'd expected compliance, maybe resentment, maybe tears. What he got was nothing. Absolute, terrifying nothing. The next 3 days were a different kind of combat. Danielle worked med-surg nights, which meant watching the hospital move through its quiet hours, meant being far from the emergency department where Caldwell's patterns were most visible, meant being systematically separated from the evidence she'd been piecing together. But she'd been trained to work with limited intel. She'd been trained to notice what people tried to hide. During her shifts, between medication passes and chart reviews, she compiled a handwritten log tucked inside her locker: fentanyl 100 micrograms patches ordered for 3 ICU patients on day 3. Administered to 2. The third dose logged as given at 2:15 p.m. by Caldwell, but the patient was in imaging at 2:15 p.m. She verified it. Morphine vials, 2 milligrams doses, 6 ordered for the surgical wing. Narcotic count showed delivery, but chart audits showed only 4 documented administrations. Midazolam discrepancies on the ICU flow sheets, dates and times that didn't match staff schedules, phantom orders that disappeared from the system but appeared in pharmacy records. It was meticulous. He was meticulous. He was also panicking, which made him sloppy in the ways that panic people get sloppy: too aggressive, too fast, burning through his supply faster as if quantity could cover the tracks that quantity created. She knew the signs. She'd seen it in Tikrit when operators burned out, when the pressure peaked and started breaking people like ceramic. She kept her log secure. She kept her observations close. She waited. On day 4, the medevac alert came through at 1:33 p.m. She was in the cafeteria eating Jell-O, literally, Jell-O, the hospital's solution to a 12-hour shift on your feet, when the overhead system activated in that particular tone that meant major trauma. Her body responded before her mind registered the words: trauma alert, Bay 4. Multiple casualty incoming. ETA for minutes. She was moving before the announcement finished. Muscle memory took over. The Jell-O cup went into the trash, her ID badge was already in her pocket from her med-surg assignment, and she was climbing the stairs toward the emergency department 2 at a time. The stairwell smelled like antiseptic and something else, the metallic edge of adrenaline, or maybe that was just her own chemistry recognizing what was happening. She could hear the controlled chaos of pre-activation before she reached the trauma bay, techs confirming equipment, nurses pulling supplies, the attending barking orders into his phone. Then she rounded the corner and stopped. Bay 4 was a storm of motion, and in the center of it was a young Marine with a sucking chest wound, his right side opened like a mouth trying to breathe, and the resident working on him was visibly panicking. The sound was mechanical, the ventilator struggling to keep pace with lungs that weren't sealing, the monitor screaming in soprano whistles because O2 sat was dropping like a stone. She moved toward the patient. That's when Caldwell stepped directly into her path. "You're not trauma certified anymore, Nurse Ross. This isn't your patient." She looked at him. She looked past him at the dying Marine. She looked at the resident's trembling hands. And then the real nightmare began. The medication discrepancies had become impossible to ignore. Danielle worked the med-surg floor now, demoted to standard nursing rotations, stripped of her trauma certification, and what she saw in those charts made her blood run cold. Morphine doses logged as administered, 10 milligrams for every 4 hours, but the patient pain scales never improved. Patients documented as receiving medications their own notes contradicted. The numbers didn't match reality. They never matched. She'd compiled 17 incidents across 14 patient charts over 9 days. All of them shared one signature, Dr. Edmund Caldwell's name in the ordering field. The pattern was surgical in its precision. Medications pulled from the locked cabinet, she could see it in the inventory system, but administered to ghosts. The doses existed on paper only, vanishing into a void where a man with a $12,000 watch could rewrite narrative with a keystroke. Danielle understood the architecture of theft. She'd studied supply lines, interdiction protocols, the mechanics of diversion. This wasn't the clumsy desperation of an addict. This was someone methodical. Calculated. A predator moving through the system with the confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences. She'd been careful not to look at him. Not to let her face betray what her eyes had catalogued. But she knew he was watching her now. The way conversation stopped when she entered a room. The way Caldwell's gaze tracked her movements during rounds, studying her the way a sniper studies terrain. He knew something was wrong. He didn't know what. That ambiguity made him dangerous. The call came overhead at 2:13 p.m. on a Thursday. Trauma incoming. ETA for minutes. MVC with rollover, multiple patients. Danielle was restocking the MedSurg supply cart when the second page hit. Trauma Team 1, report to Bay 4. Trauma Team 1, Bay 4. She kept her hand steady, moving bandages from the box to the shelf. Around her, the floor erupted into controlled chaos, nurses checking equipment, residents grabbing trauma shears, the hospital transforming from routine to emergency in the space of 3 breaths. This was the rhythm she'd been trained for. This was where her hands remembered what her mouth had never confessed. The third page changed everything. Code Blue, Trauma Bay 4. All available staff to Trauma 4. Not MVC. Not rollover. The tenor of the pages had shifted. The second announcement should have triggered full trauma mobilization, surgical teams, attending physicians, the entire infrastructure of emergency response moving like a choreographed ballet. Instead, Danielle heard silence where there should have been boots on tile. No running footsteps. No voices calling for instruments. No sound of the trauma team assembling. She moved toward the ICU hallway without thinking. Her body knew the way before her mind authorized the movement. The trauma bay doors were locked. She pressed the call button, watching through the reinforced glass window. The bay was empty except for one resident, Dr. Marcus Chen, maybe 28, maybe not even that, standing motionless, staring at an empty stretcher as if it might offer salvation. The ambulance radio crackled from inside. Sacred Heart, this is Medic 47. We have a single male, approximately 240 pounds, penetrating chest trauma, tension pneumothorax developing. Sucking wound left anterior chest, subcutaneous emphysema spreading across the anterior neck. Breathing compromised. Patient is combat veteran, Marine Corps, currently in full arrest. Defibrillator showing asystole. Pushing epi now. ETA 90 seconds. Danielle's pupils dilated. Full arrest. Asystole. Combat veteran. Marine. The door buzzed open and she walked through before she could think about it. Dr. Chen's head snapped up, surprise flickering across his face like he'd forgotten the demoted nurse existed. Ms. Ross, you don't have. Where's your trauma team? Her voice had changed. Lower. The deferential lilt had evaporated. This was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Dr. Caldwell reassigned them. Stack consults on the orthopedic floor. I tried to reach him but he's not answering pages and I can't. Chen's hands were trembling. 20 years of medical education and his mind had fractured under the weight of impossible arithmetic. 1 patient plus no team equals a math with no solution. Danielle moved to the bay window. The ambulance bay doors outside were sliding open. Red light strobing across the concrete like a heartbeat made of warning. The rig pulled in and paramedics were already moving before the wheels stopped. She could see the patient through the glass doors, bare chest, a wound the size of a fist just below the left clavicle, the surrounding tissue moving in and out like the patient was breathing through his ribs instead of his lungs. Get me the crash cart, she said. Not a request. A command delivered in the tone of someone whose authority came from something older than hospital credentials. You're not certified. Get. The crash cart. Danielle was already moving toward the ambulance bay doors. The paramedics were bringing him in now, moving with the controlled urgency of professionals who'd already done everything they could. The Marine's skin was the color of dishwasher water. His eyes were rolled back, his body convulsing once, then gone still. Not seizing anymore. Just gone. She met them at the stretcher. The wound was worse than the radio report suggested. The pneumothorax had progressed. She could see the subcutaneous emphysema, the spreading bulge across his neck where air was tracking through tissue planes, suffocating him from the inside. His oxygen saturation was 42%. His blood pressure was a whisper. His heart was no longer beating. He had maybe 3 minutes before his brainstem died. What's his unit? She was already scanning the stretcher for his personal effects. Standard protocol, patients always came with a pack, a bag, something from their world before this. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, the lead paramedic said. Dark Horse Company. He was at Sacred Heart with another Marine when the IED detonated outside the parking structure. That's our Marine. This one was just leaving. Dark Horse. Hayes's unit. The recognition landed like a physical blow, but Danielle didn't let it land on her face. The patient's combat pack was under the stretcher, worn green issue, patches faded, but intact. She grabbed it with one hand while moving with the paramedics toward the trauma bay. Get him on the bed. Chest leads now. Push epi. Get me a 14-gauge needle. Dr. Chen was pale. You can't, the attending. The attending is not here. The trauma team is not here. This patient is in cardiac arrest with a penetrating thoracic injury and you are going to let me work or you are going to watch him die. Choose. The words landed in the room like an order from command. Something in her voice, something that came from 9 years ago, from desert heat, from decisions made under fire, made Chen step back instead of stepping up. The paramedics began unloading equipment with renewed purpose. Someone had taken charge. That was enough. The Marine was on the stretcher now, shirtless, his chest rising and falling with the ventilator bag the paramedic was squeezing. Danielle's eyes catalogued the wound. Classic sucking chest wound. The air was entering the pleural space with each breath, compressing the lung, pushing the mediastinum, preventing venous return to the heart. It was simple physics. It was also fatal. She tore open his combat pack with her teeth. The MRE packets tumbled out, meals ready to eat, vacuum-sealed brown packets designed to survive extreme conditions. She grabbed one, her hands moving with the automatic precision of someone who'd done this before. Not in a hospital. In a place where there was no full line, no crash cart, no backup. Just a wound and the material at hand and the knowledge that the next 3 minutes determined whether someone walked out of this place or got carried out. Danielle ripped the MRE packaging open. The plastic was sterile. Sealed. Designed to maintain integrity under impossible circumstances. She tore one edge open, then folded 3 sides of the packet. Left one corner unsealed. Her hands knew what to do. Her hands had learned this in Tikrit when the power was out and the medical supply run was delayed and a Marine with a sucking chest wound was drowning in his own pneumothorax. 3-sided occlusive dressing, she said quietly. Allows air out, not in. Combat medicine. She pressed the sealed sides directly over the wound. The plastic adhered to his skin. The pressure was immediate. The air that had been whistling through the wound with each breath suddenly had nowhere to go except backward through the patient's own valve. His oxygen saturation climbed. 48%. 52%. 64%. Push another epi, she said. Dr. Chen was frozen. The paramedic who'd been bagging the patient was staring at her. A resident in the corner, she didn't know his name, didn't care, whispered, "Where did you learn that?" No one answered. The monitor showed a rhythm change. Organized electrical activity. A heartbeat. Weak, but present. 70% oxygen saturation. then 75. Then 82. Get me tape. Secure 3 sides. Leave a corner open for decompression. Hands moved. The equipment appeared. The improvisational dress was reinforced. The Marine's color was improving, still gray, but no longer the gray of death. The gray of someone still fighting. His pupils reacted. His body was still there. His heart was still trying. The doors burst open. Not the trauma team. Dr. Edmund Caldwell. His face was white with something that wasn't medical concern. His face was white with recognition of a problem he hadn't planned for. He saw her standing there, covered in the Marine's blood. Her hand steady. Her voice cutting commands like someone born to authority. He saw everything he'd been trying to bury suddenly standing in the middle of his controlled space, making decisions, saving lives, being seen. This nurse performed unauthorized procedures outside her scope, Caldwell said. His voice was steady, but his hands were moving faster than they should have been. He was already reaching for his phone. She's suspended pending investigation. Security. Now. 2 hospital security guards appeared in the doorway like they'd been summoned not by radio but by sheer force of his will. The Marine's oxygen saturation was 88% and climbing. His heart was maintaining a rhythm. His blood pressure was still low, but it was a number that meant something. It meant he was staying. Danielle removed her badge without being asked. The laminate was still warm. Her name was on it, D. Ross, RN, trauma certification. Was. Not is. Was. She handed it to the guard without looking at him. Her eye stayed on the monitor. The rhythm stayed organized. The oxygen stayed climbing. The Marine's chest was still rising and falling. Still trying. I need someone to take over his care, she said quietly. To Dr. Chen. To the paramedic. To anyone who could hear. He needs vascular access. Type and cross. Prep for chest tube. His lung is still compressed. The dressing is temporary. He's out of the immediate lethal phase, but he's not out of danger. You're done here, Caldwell said. Danielle turned to face him. The blood on her scrubs was still wet. Her hands were still steady. When she spoke, her voice was exactly what it had been that day in the parking lot when he demanded her resignation. Flat. Calm. Devastatingly composed. He's your next problem. She walked toward the security guards, and the guards walked her out of the trauma bay, past the nurses' station where people pretended not to see her, past the waiting room where families held their prayers like they were made of glass, past Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hayes, who was watching from his ICU window, his face pressed against the glass, his eyes wide with recognition and something that looked like understanding. The rain had started while she was inside. It fell on the parking lot like applause, like percussion against the asphalt, like the sound of something ending. Danielle walked to the bus stop 2 blocks away, her cardboard box balanced on her hip, and waited for the next connection to anywhere else. The trauma bay doors swung inward and Danielle was still there, hands moving with the precision of someone who'd done this under mortar fire. The Marine's blood coated her scrubs like a second skin. 02 sat climbing. 91. 93. 95. Stable. Her fingers worked the makeshift chest seal with the muscle memory of 1,000 drills, of the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. Dr. Caldwell appeared in the doorway. His face drained the moment he saw her. Not because she'd saved the patient. Because she'd done it without him. Because in 60 seconds of pure medical crisis, she'd become something he couldn't dismiss, couldn't diminish, couldn't control. His eye swept from her blood-soaked hands to the monitor, climbing like a prayer answered. The resident stood frozen against the wall, useless. Step back, Danielle said. Not to Caldwell. To the resident. Her voice had dropped an octave. No please. No apology. Just a command issued the way you issue commands when you've held the line against overwhelming odds. The resident moved. Caldwell didn't move at all. He stood there watching her work, watching the patient's color return from ash gray to something that resembled human, watching the impossible thing unfold in front of him. The heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Beep. 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 Normal. Beautiful. Alive. Get him upstairs, Danielle said to the charge nurse. Cardiothoracic standing by. Yes. They're prepped. Now. The stretcher rolled. The team moved like water flowing around stone. Nobody questioned. Nobody hesitated. The attending who'd been frozen now actually looked at Danielle, and in his eye she saw the question forming, "Who are you?" That was when Caldwell moved. His hand went to his hip where his phone lived like a weapon. His jaw clenched the way it clenched when he was about to make a call that would end someone. When he was about to make sure nobody ever found out what he'd done. When he was about to protect himself by destroying everyone in his path. "Security," he said into the phone. His voice was smooth as oil over broken glass. "Trauma bay. Now." Danielle turned. Blood dripped from her gloves onto the tile floor. Tap. 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 Like a metronome counting down. That nurse just performed unauthorized medical procedures outside her scope of practice, Caldwell continued into the phone. His voice carried the kind of authority that came from having connections, from knowing people, from understanding exactly how hospitals functioned when you had something on the people who ran them. She violated her suspension terms. I want her removed immediately. Now. 2 security officers appeared in the doorway within 90 seconds. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before, who'd escorted unstable employees out of the building, who didn't know they were about to escort out the only person in this hospital who'd actually done something worth doing. "You need to come with us," the first one said. He was taller, with the kind of bulk that came from gym work and the kind of eyes that didn't want to be there. Danielle stripped off her gloves. The blood-soaked latex fell into the biohazard container with a whisper. "You're removing me from the patient I just saved," she said. Not a question. A statement of fact. "Orders from administration," the second officer said. Younger. Uncomfortable. He wouldn't look directly at her. Caldwell watched from the doorway, his phone still in his hand, and she saw it then, the panic underneath the authority, the fear underneath the control. He knew. Somehow, he knew that what she'd just done was the thing that couldn't be unseen, the moment that would unravel everything. A patient saved with field medicine precision. A patient he deliberately delayed saving. A witness to his sabotage standing there alive in blood-soaked scrubs. The walk to HR took 5 minutes. The elevator smelled like disinfectant and the particular silence of people pretending this wasn't happening. The hallway on the administrative floor echoed with her dripping scrubs. Water from the blood hit the tile. Drop. 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 Like a countdown nobody was watching. The administrator's office was on the east wing. Wide windows overlooking Raleigh's skyline. A desk that cost more than most people made in 6 months. And Dr. Caldwell already sitting there, waiting, his paperwork already prepared like he'd known this moment was coming, like he'd been ready for 3 days. Danielle, the administrator said quietly. Her name was Patterson. She'd hired Danielle 9 years ago, had watched her work 12-hour shifts with the dedication of someone rebuilding themselves from ashes. "Please sit." She sat. The blood on her scrubs left a stain on the chair that looked like a map of somewhere she'd been a long time ago. "Dr. Caldwell has filed a formal termination request," Patterson continued. She still wouldn't look directly at Danielle. "Unauthorized medical procedures outside your scope of practice. Insubordination. Violation of the suspension terms imposed 2 days ago." The patient was in cardiac arrest, Danielle said flatly. "Penetrating chest trauma. Sucking chest wound. The code team was delayed." "Exactly," Caldwell said. His voice carried the kind of confidence that came from knowing the outcome was already decided. Which is why you should have waited for protocol. Instead, you performed an unauthorized procedure with materials found in the patient's personal effects. An MRE packet, for God's sake. You created a liability issue the moment you touched that wound. I saved his life, Danielle said. You violated hospital policy, Caldwell countered. And you did it while under suspension for saving a different Marine 2 days earlier. The room went so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights buzz overhead. Patterson's hands trembled as she opened the file. Danielle could see her own name typed in bold across the first page. Termination effective immediately. Effective immediately, your employment with Sacred Heart is terminated, Patterson said, her voice barely above a whisper. Your trauma certification is revoked pending a review by the State Nursing Board. This termination is for cause. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your address on file. She pushed the papers forward. Danielle signed them with a steady hand. The pen didn't shake. Her signature looked like it always looked, clean, professional, the signature of someone who'd been real once, before everything got erased. You'll need to return your badge and access credentials, Patterson said. Danielle unclipped her badge. The photo on it showed someone who wasn't her anymore. Someone deferential. Someone who fit. Someone who didn't know how to fight back because she'd spent 9 years learning not to. She set it on the desk and stood. The chair scraped against tile. For what it's worth, Patterson said quietly, you saved that Marine's life. Caldwell stood too. That's not your decision to make. And neither is mine. Hospital policy is hospital policy. She violated it. This is the consequence. Danielle looked at him. Really looked. And she saw something shifting in his face, something that looked almost like fear. Because what he'd just done, what he'd just put in writing, was eliminate a witness to the fact that he delayed a code team. Eliminate someone whose precision in a crisis was impossible to explain away as anything other than what it was, military field medicine. Eliminate someone who'd probably already figured out what he'd been stealing and from where. She was dangerous. Not because she was angry, but because she was competent. And competent people remember things. The walk to the employee parking lot took her past the ER. Through the glass doors she could see the monitors, the controlled chaos, the small world she'd inhabited for 9 years. She'd expected to cry. She'd prepared herself for tears, for the kind of breakdown that comes from losing everything you built. It never came. Instead, what she felt was a kind of clarity. Cold. Sharp. The clarity of someone who'd just been handed a choice between staying invisible or becoming visible, and the choice had been made for her by a man who was too afraid to understand what he was looking at. 2 days later, rain hammered Raleigh like artillery. Danielle stood at the bus stop on Fayetteville Street with a cardboard box balanced on her hip. The box was falling apart. The rain had soaked through the bottom third, and her possessions were starting to show through like forgotten maps. A cracked ceramic mug that said "World's Okayest Nurse" in fading letters. A succulent plant, dying from neglect, its leaves drooping like they'd forgotten how to hold on. A framed photograph of her son in marine dress blues, taken 6 years ago, when he was still a boy playing at being a man. And sewn inside her jacket lining, pressed against her heart where she'd kept it through 9 years of erasure, a faded unit patch from Tikrit. 4th Battalion, Charlie Company, 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force Medical Battalion. The unit insignia worn smooth from being touched, from being held, from being the only proof left that she'd ever been real. The rain fell harder. A petal dropped from the succulent and landed in the cardboard box, floating there like something drowning. She didn't move. The bus was supposed to arrive in 4 minutes, but the schedule had never been reliable, and she had nowhere to be that actually mattered anymore. No shifts. No certifications. No identity pinned to her scrubs. Just Major Danielle Ross standing in the rain at a bus stop in Raleigh with everything she owned falling apart. Inside Sacred Heart, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hayes lay in the cardiac recovery unit with 6 stitches in his shoulder and a saline drip in his arm, and he was making phone calls. The Marine she'd saved, Corporal Davies, was asking questions from the bed next to him. Questions about how that chest seal had been created with something nobody kept in field kits anymore. Questions about who moves like that under pressure. Questions about why her hands had shaken when she was working, not from fear but from something that looked like muscle memory being forced to wake up after a long sleep. "Her name is Major Danielle Ross," Hayes said into the phone, his voice steady despite the painkillers trying to pull him under. "And she saved my life in Tikrit 9 years ago. She saved that Marine's life this morning. And they just fired her for it." His next call was to his son. The lobby doors of Sacred Heart opened at 7:43 a.m., and every head turned. A young man in dress blues walked through like his boots owned the tile, his voice cutting through the morning chatter with the precision of a parade ground command. "Major Ross." Not a question. A recognition. A salute delivered in 2 syllables. Behind him came 3 more Marines in formation, their presence changing the air pressure in the room the way a thunderhead darkens a valley. The day shift nurse at the desk froze. Visitors didn't walk into hospitals like they were claiming territory. Visitors didn't speak with that kind of authority. This one did. His eyes found Danielle before she could move, before she could even process that her son's commanding officer, the man whose wound she'd cleaned less than 72 hours ago, had somehow become a gateway between her past and the present she'd fought 9 years to maintain. The hospital administrator was already on his 3rd call of the morning. Thomas Brenner had flagged something in Sacred Heart's background check system at 6:18 a.m. that made his hands shake. The routine employment verification he'd ordered on Danielle Ross for the termination paperwork had pinged back with a red warning, classified security clearance. Not past tense. Active. Danielle Ross held a current national security clearance, which meant the Pentagon had her in their system as someone worth protecting, which meant the casual nurse nobody paid attention to might be something the federal government actually cared about. By 6:44 a.m., Brenner's phone was vibrating with calls from a Pentagon liaison office he didn't know existed. By 7:15 a.m., he was being told to stand down the termination, restore her hospital access, and clear the trauma department because federal investigators were en route to Sacred Heart within the hour. He'd tried to call Dr. Caldwell. No answer. That terrified him more than the Pentagon calling his personal cell. At 8:02 a.m., they arrived. The woman moved like someone used to being feared, tailored blazer, government-issue leather portfolio, credentials that read Pentagon Investigative Service in letters so official they seemed to hum. Beside her came 2 FBI agents in dark suits that probably cost more than Brenner's monthly car payment. They didn't wait for an escort. They asked for Danielle Ross by her full name and rank. Major Danielle Marie Ross. The way they said it made the air feel thinner. The administrator's jaw clenched as he realized he'd been sitting across from her in the break room for 9 years without knowing she existed at all. The interrogation room, actually just a converted office with a metal table and 3 metal chairs, became Caldwell's tomb at 8:56 a.m. The female agent spread documents across the table like a card player laying down a winning hand. "Dr. Caldwell, when you ordered the expanded background check on Ms. Ross to justify her termination, you triggered classified security protocols. Our investigation revealed something else. Medication logs. Patient charts with altered timestamps and wrong drug quantities. Financial records showing controlled substance diversion going back 14 months. 573 units of fentanyl patches. 211 vials of Dilaudid. 84 boxes of oxycodone. We estimate $307,000 in diverted pharmaceuticals," the agent said. Her voice didn't fluctuate. Caldwell's hands began to shake. "When Major Ross started noticing inconsistencies in your records, you initiated a campaign to remove her, the witness who could connect the dots. You strategically reassigned trauma staff during a critical code. You delayed response to endanger a patient. Then you attempted to forge Major Ross's personnel records to justify her termination." The male agent laid out the final evidence, database logs showing Caldwell's access to Danielle's file at 11:43 p.m. the night she was fired. He tried to alter her security clearance designation. He'd attempted to add false disciplinary records dating back 6 years. The timestamps were there. The failed modifications were logged. You falsified federal employment records involving a classified military officer. That's conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and reckless endangerment. Possibly attempted destruction of evidence. Caldwell opened his mouth. No words came. His carefully constructed world, the one built on reputation and position and the assumption that nobody would ever look too closely at a doctor's decisions, had just imploded in 90 seconds. In the lobby, the number had grown to 147. Marines in dress blues filled Sacred Heart like an honor guard, and they stood at attention when Danielle walked toward the administrator's office, flanked by Pentagon officials. Her son was there. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was there. Corporal Davies, the Marine she'd saved 3 days ago with a vacuum-sealed MRE packet and hands that remembered every combat medicine protocol she'd ever learned, was there in a wheelchair because he'd insisted on leaving his hospital bed to witness this. Hayes's voice was steady but raw. You disappeared after Tikrit. We were told you died in the final assault. Danielle's jaw moved once. She'd trained herself for 9 years not to crack in public, but her eyes betrayed her, moisture gathering at the corners like tears were forming from shrapnel fragments embedded too deep to ever fully remove. They erased me. The operation was classified and buried. I became legally non-existent. The Pentagon's orders were explicit: never surface, never claim service, never contact anyone who might ask questions. Her son was crying openly. He was 24 years old, a second lieutenant in the same unit his mother had been erased from, and he'd just learned that every birthday card he never received, every holiday he spent thinking she'd abandoned him, every year he wondered what he'd done wrong, it was all a lie orchestrated by the government that demanded her silence. I've been watching from the shadows for 9 years. Every promotion you got, I knew. Every commendation. I knew all of it. They wouldn't let me reach out. They wouldn't let me be your mother. Her son pulled her into an embrace so tight it looked like he was trying to fold her back into existence. The elevator doors opened at 9:34 a.m., and Dr. Edmund Caldwell stepped out into the hallway where he'd demoted Danielle Ross 72 hours earlier. He'd planned to walk toward the stairwell, slip down to the parking garage, maybe make it to his car before anyone realized he was gone. The FBI agents intercepted him with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. One moved left. One moved right. One stepped forward and read him his rights in a voice like a metronome, a mechanical, relentless, exact. Edmund Caldwell, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit drug trafficking, falsification of federal records, obstruction of justice, and reckless endangerment. The handcuffs went on in the exact spot where he'd stood yesterday, lecturing Danielle about professionalism and protocol. The metal clicked against his wrists. The sound carried across the trauma floor like applause. As they escorted him past the lobby where 150 service members now stood in formation, Caldwell saw their faces. Saw the way they looked at him like he was something to be scraped off a boot. Saw Danielle Ross standing with her shoulders back and her head level, no longer the invisible woman who'd cleaned up after his cruelty. She'd become something he'd never seen coming, a soldier wearing scrubs, validated by the entire apparatus of the federal government, her name finally restored to the record he'd tried to erase. 6 months later, Sacred Heart's trauma department ran with the precision of a military operation under the direction of its new department head, Major Danielle Ross. Her scrubs were embroidered with her real name and rank. Her security clearance was restored, official and active, which meant she could speak about her service, carefully, with redactions, but she could speak. Her son visited every weekend, sometimes bringing Hayes, sometimes bringing other Marines from her old unit who'd waited 9 years to tell her thank you. At 11:07 p.m. on a Tuesday, during shift change, she walked through the employee entrance where Dr. Edmund Caldwell sat at the security desk, badge scanner in front of him, his physician's license permanently revoked, his plea agreement requiring him to work as a night guard at the hospital he'd once run like a kingdom. His hands trembled as he scanned her badge. The light blinked green. Access granted. Good evening, Major Ross. His voice was gravel and regret. She nodded, no smile, no cruelty, just acknowledgement that he existed in the world she'd reclaimed. She walked past him into the emergency department where her trauma team waited, 7 nurses and 3 residents trained in her methods, all of them ready to move like she moved, to think like she thought, to save lives with the kind of precision that came from having learned medicine on a battlefield where hesitation meant death. In the parking lot outside, 150 service members stood at attention as Danielle accepted a shadow box containing her faded unit patch from Tikrit, the one sewn against her heart for 9 years, alongside her restored medals, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, Meritorious Service Medal for operations that officially never happened but were now officially recognized. Her son saluted beside her, tears streaming, finally able to claim his mother's name aloud without violating classified protocols. The rain had finally stopped. The sky above Raleigh cleared. And in that moment, with Marines in dress blue standing in formation around her and her son's hand in hers, Danielle understood that some wars are fought in deserts under burning suns. Some wars are fought in hospital corridors under fluorescent lights. Sometimes the bravest warriors carry stethoscopes, not guns. If you've been underestimated by someone who had no idea who you really were, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below. And if you believe that quiet strength is the most dangerous kind, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss the stories of people the world tried to erase, and the moments they chose to come back.